Elagabalus is a Roman emperor who was generously endowed by nature with beautiful appearances, but apparently compensated for this by his lack of intelligence and upbringing. I do not even dare to call him amorous, for he is the most depraved emperor of all debaucheries and perverts. He is a homosexual who has been repeatedly married. I guess with the mores that prevailed at the time and the environment in which the boy grew up, it was hard to expect him to become a highly educated, righteous man. Though it is fair to say that even in that mired in debauchery, there were many decent people with normal moral principles and sexual preferences. But Elagabalus, unlike many others, had position and power, which with his rotten soul, sadistic tendencies, and boundless love for the stronger sex was a hellish mix. Elagabalus was born in 204 AD into a family with blood ties to the emperor of the time. Perhaps such a kinship would have played a positive role and given the child maximum opportunities for personal growth and development if he had been surrounded by normal people. But his grandmother Julia Maesa and mother Julia Soemia were promiscuous, greedy, and power-hungry. So Elagabalus became a tool in their hands to achieve these goals. To begin with, his mother did not know who the child's father was. Or perhaps it was to her advantage to say so. Although she gave birth in wedlock, she told everyone that the father of the boy was Caracalla, the then consul and future emperor of Rome. Knowing the moral character of the supposed father, it is quite possible to believe that this is true. So the boy, named at birth by the Syrian name Avita Varia Bassianus, was changed to Marcus Aurelius Antoninus. As the years passed, Caracalla became emperor stupid, vicious, and unprincipled. He was assassinated after 9 years of his talentless rule. Elagabalus was 13 at the time, having already had time to absorb all the charms of his mother's, grandmother's, and eventual father's natures, as well as to taste the debauched life. At this time, the boy was already aware of his natural beauty, but he did not seek to make it more masculine. On the contrary, he wanted to be worshipped by all men and admired for his data. He dreamed of becoming as beautiful as the best of women. Elagabalus used women's cosmetics. He blushed his smooth cheeks, painted his lips, and wore women's jewelry, rings, bracelets, and necklaces. His mother and grandmother did everything possible to make their offspring an emperor. It happened when the boy was 14 years old. Elagabalus went down in history as Emperor Caesar Marcus Aurelius Antoninus Augustus. Imagine what that led to when his vicious narcissistic nature was joined by limitless possibilities. Elagabalus began to call himself Elagabalus, that is, God of the Sun. He dressed in exquisite silk robes, which he never wore twice, and rode in golden chariots. When the child emperor entered Rome, his portrait was carried in front of the procession, where Elagabalus was in all his glory, dressed in gorgeous robes, with a pampered, lavishly painted face, all hung with jewels. He built a temple which all the nobles of Rome were obliged to attend. There he personally conducted services, dressed in sumptuous robes and with bright makeup on his face. The culmination of the worship was the dance of Elagabalus to the singing of many girls who made unambiguous erotic movements at the same time. He introduced the game of the lottery, where very poor people were invited to a feast in the palace and were given spoons with numbers written on them. During the feast, Elagabalus called out the numbers and said what prize went to its owner. Of course, there were some unpleasant prizes, for example, a dead cat, but mostly the poor received either gold or camels or some other good. So it is not surprising that the people were pleased with such an emperor. But at these feasts one could already see a certain abnormality in the ruler, which manifested itself in very unusual culinary cravings. His favorite dishes were nightingale brains, scallops of live roosters, rice with white pearls, and beans with amber. The young emperor also had other amusements. Beggarly cripples were brought to the palace, given a drink, and then led into a room with trained predators. Understandably, people were frightened out of their wits, but Elagabalus and his favorites watched through special secret windows and enjoyed it. It must be said that at first most people were in favor of such a ruler because they had had enough of his cruel predecessors. But their hopes were not realized. During the reign of this promiscuous boy, sacrifice became widespread. Throughout the land, the most beautiful boys of the noblest families were murdered to please the strange deity the emperor worshipped. He was married twice, and, according to historians, with a heavy heart performed his marital duty. He had many mistresses, but, unlike men, more than one relationship with no one repeated. Another of his amusements was this. Elagabalus, stripped naked, sat in a golden chariot in which he harnessed equally scantily clad maidens who drove him around the palace. Elagabalus was not only straight but also homosexual. The love of his life was men. He boasted that he had as many lovers as the most lecherous whore had not. Elagabalus chose them among actors, circus performers, slaves, etc. The main criterion for choosing partners was their large phallus. The emperor had special men who looked for young men of appropriate appearance, undressed them, assessed the size of their genitals, and brought the best, in their opinion, to the emperor for his personal testing. Anyone who pleased him in bed, Elagabalus lodged in the palace and gave them high government positions. Among his favorites was one man who greatly won the emperor's heart, the slave Gericles. He was a charioteer who, in the literal sense of the word, during one race fell in front of where Elagabalus sat. The helmet flew off the young man's head, and the emperor saw the young man's handsome face, framed by luxurious white curls. And if we add to this picture the powerful body that no one had ever seen before in a slave, it becomes clear why Gericles was at once a thorn in Elagabalus' heart. After this incident, the ruler ordered the slave to be brought to his chambers and made him his lover. He was so infatuated with his new favorite that he put his mother, also a slave, in the palace and gave her the status of consul. Gericles was so successful in pleasing his master in bed that he publicly kissed his genitals, saying that he was paying tribute to him. Another interesting fact about Elagabalus, although it is not known for certain whether this was in fact the case. Some ancient historians wrote that he liked to kill his enemies in a very refined and pretentious way. Elagabalus invited them to a sumptuous dinner, sat them on certain seats, the most comfortable, as he told the guests, and when everyone sat at the table and quietly feasted, rose petals in such quantity began to fall on the guests and friends that people fell asleep with their heads, and they suffocated. It is only unclear why they did not jump up from their seats and flee. Perhaps they understood that for such disrespect for the emperor, they would die anyway. There is even a painting on this subject by the artist Lawrence Almanadima, The Roses of Elagabalus. In his heart, Elagabalus probably understood that his age was short. But he thought he was worthy to die beautifully and by his own hand. So he had strings of golden thread, bottles of poison, and golden daggers lined up everywhere in the palace in order to kill himself should the need arise. He also built a high tower and paved the ground beneath it with bars of gold. What for? So that if he chose this kind of death and wanted to throw himself from its top, his noble brains and blood would spread on the gold, not on the muddy ground. As time went on, Elagabalus' life became more and more resented by the Romans. At one point the cup of patience was overflowing, and the soldiers staged a riot in which Elagabalus and his whole family were killed. Their corpses were poured on hooks, dragged through all the city streets, and then thrown into the river. The Senate forbade the name Antoninus to be given to children henceforth and forever. Elagabalus lived only 18 years, but in that time he managed to leave such a mark on himself in history that to this day his name is synonymous with vulgarity and debauchery. And no one can say anything good about him. What would you like to see the next video on our channel? Tell us in the comments.